I've got MixBox instantiated on a drum bus here. Now, all the tracks feeding it are completely dry, and I'm doing a kind of top-down approach where I'm processing the bus first, and then I'll go and do the individual tracks. So I'm going to give you a little before and after, and then we'll unpack what's going on here. So here are the drums with this enabled. And bypassed. Those are the original dry, unprocessed drums. All right, so let's take a look at what's going on. I'm going to bypass all the modules and look at them one at a time. So here's the EQ, and this is the British EQ based on the SSL style interface. So that alone is doing a lot of the heavy lifting. I'm using the low band here to really push. I'm almost all the way at the top, down at 65, and I have it in peak mode. That's shelf versus peak, which is what I want. Now here, I'm scooping out around 500. That's the frequency. There's a resonance on the snare that I'm going to have to go in and get at directly on the track, but for now, kind of painting the broad strokes. And I've got an upper mid cut here at around 600. So really zeroing in on that frequency. And then an extreme high boost here again in peak mode at 5K. Shelf. Peak. And you don't normally use a dry, wet blend for EQ, but hey, it's here and I can. I'm using off a little bit on it. Now here I've got the parametric EQ, and I'm using this specifically for two things. To focus in on the kick. Let me bypass it. Well, it's bypassed now. Here it is enabled. Bypassed. Enabled. So I'm really zeroing in on the kick by boosting at 60, but there's a resonance there, and I'm pulling it out at 30 here. Now again, I can zero in on the kick track and tweak that, but this is the drum bus. And a boost at 16. Just to bring up more of the top end. And again, I'm just easing off a little bit because I've got some fairly dramatic values here. Now I'm running it through the LA2A emulation called White 2A. And we all know and love this from T-Rex. It's a fantastic sounding tube-style compressor. So you really hear it adding to the thickness of the drums. And this we can dial in parallel if we want. Something like that's good. And then I'm running it through some tape saturation. Bypass. Enabled. Now here I'm just adding a little bit because it's pretty aggressive. I'm boosting the gain and attenuating here, but just a little bit. It goes a long way. Like that. And finally, some plate reverb. And I've got the wet all the way up here. I'm dialing it in with the mix control. So I just want a little bit of that. Dry. With the reverb. Got a fairly small size, very short decay, no pre-delay. And the color influences this a lot. I'll dial it up. We get a much darker plate. Versus a brighter kind of color. A little bit of modulation on the tail and a little bit of filtering. So let's dial it in where we want it. Something like that's good. So places it in a nice space. So once again, everything off. And on. And I've got everything just at unity value here. And there's one preset that I started with on the tape, and I modified it a bit. Now I started with an empty rack. Let's save this as a preset. And if we look here, we'll see it now in the rack presets. Next video, we'll put Mixbox to work on the kick and snare.